This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Line Illustrations. If you love quirky, colorful art transformed into fun, handmade stationery items, pretty much guaranteed to brighten somebody's day, that's just what you'll find in my new online shop at finelimeillustrations.com. That's fine as in I'm fine, lime as in the fruit, illustrations.com. Browse the entire collection or sign up for my email list to see some behind-the-scenes peeks into my studio. You'll also get first notice of new product launches and subscriber-only sales. And as an added little bonus, you'll also receive a free coloring sheet to help you relax and de-stress from your day. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Melissa, and this week, in keeping with this season's theme of showing up as your true self in your work, we're going to be talking about embracing the wisdom that comes to us with each new day that we spend on this spinning planet. And my guest this week is Zannat Reza, who I have known for a long time, and I'm really excited for this conversation. Hello, Zannat.
Hey, Melissa.
I am so glad you're here today. But for those of you who may not know her, Zanna is a healthy aging advocate, and her mission is to promote health and well-being and to shake up the system so we can grow older on our own terms. And she is also the director of the Future of Aging Social Impact Team at SE Health, which is a not-for-profit home health social enterprise. And so, yes, today we're going to be talking about, I don't want to say getting older necessarily, but learning to embrace the wisdom that comes to us with each day. I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but my dentist is, she's so awesome. as far as going to the dentist goes, she makes it as good as it can be. But she always talks about this when she talks about, looking after your teeth and things as you get older. And she never says getting older. She always says, as we get wiser. And I just love the way she reframes that. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, I think. But before we get into that, Zanna, the first question I ask everyone who comes on the show is, did you feel like you were creative as a kid?
Nope, most definitely not. I guess I was always too scared to try new things. And my benchmark for creativity was my sister, who's extremely artistic. And I always looked at her, and she's younger than me, but I'd look and say, wow, she's really creative. And if I can't do that, then I'm not creative. But looking back, I do think there was some creativity in me. I used to enjoy, I am and was very introverted. I'm kind of ambivert now, but I was very introverted, but I used to love drama and acting in plays. So I was like, okay, thinking back, yeah, you know what? That was creative. I really enjoyed that. Playing with Lego, all the make-believe games. But at the time, and thinking back, I'm like, no, really, I was not a creative kid. I was super nerdy.
The thing is, we're all creative. I think just sometimes we don't recognize the things that we enjoy as necessarily being creative. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny. And then we look back on it and we're like, yeah, it's an interesting question that I love asking. And I always have a little bet with myself as to how the guest is going to answer. So you and I knew each other in a past life where you had a different career. You were a dietitian, and you did a lot of community work that way. You may have seen Zannat on TV. She has popped up on television a few times. And you have moved into this new role. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about how you started out. What led you into, is it dietetics? Is that the right way to say it? Dietetics?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this question. So my journey is really zigzaggy. And so, like I said, I was a nerd. I am a nerd, huge science nerd. And so I was like, well, obviously I'm going to do science in undergrad. So I started off in biochemistry because I'm like, love biology, whatever. And then by third year, I was like, I really do not like these biochem labs. This is a problem because this would be helpful moving forward. So then I thought, well, I like science. I like food. So how about nutrition? And so then I went on to doing a master's of community health, specializing in nutrition. And at the end of that degree, they said, hey, you can now apply to be a dietitian. And I thought, great, what is that? Like I really had no idea. I had no idea. So anyway, we had to fill out all this paperwork, and I then became a quote unquote dietitian, but really an accidental dietitian. And while I did my master's, I took a marketing and communications course. And I thought, I love this. Like, I love the psychology behind all of this. So then I went on to specialize in media and communications. And part of it was also when I graduated, there really weren't a lot of jobs in community health. So I stumbled across a position with the social issues marketing agency. So back in the day, we call it social marketing, but it had nothing to do with social media because that wasn't around. So I would say that kind of sparked my creativity because I learned a ton about advertising. I learned about the creative process. And I was like, this is a whole new world. Like for a science nerd like me, this was the first time I even stepped into that world. And the learning was amazing. But, working at an agency as a junior person is kind of tough, a lot of long hours, all kinds of drama. And then this amazing job popped up with the Food Association, and they were looking for someone who had, quote unquote, some creativity in the nutrition education world. And that the main part of the job is to be their media spokesperson. So part of me was like, wow, this is a great opportunity. And the other part was like, oh my gosh, what does that mean, media spokesperson? Like, I know nothing about that. Anyway, I jumped into it because it was just the right fit. I got media trained. And then I was like, wow, I really love this. I really have found, kind of that acting kind of came in handy.
Yeah.
For being a media spokesperson.
I was going to say, as an introvert, did it push you outside of your comfort zone? That would have pushed me outside.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. My very first interview was on breakfast television with Kevin Frankish. And, you got to be up at 6 a.m. or something ridiculous. I was so nauseous. Like I thought, how is this going to work? And I got some really bad advice from the PR people. So I said, hey, I don't know if I'm going to remember all my key points. So can I put some on cue cards and stick it on the table, like away from the camera? And they said, yeah, go ahead and do that. So I did that. And of course, Kevin Frankish, who's an amazing, funny guy, great personality. So we start off with, oh, what are you here to talk about? Blah, blah, blah. And then he says to the camera, he's like, hold on, I got to show you something. And he rips off my cue cards. And he's like, look, and what is your third point, Zannat? And I was just like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what my third point was. And so I said, I don't know, but here's what I can tell you. And I just had to think on my feet and go with it. And because it was just so funny, it actually added a lot of flavor. And at the end of that, I'm like, okay, if I could make it through that kind of interview, I'm okay. I can do this. But yeah, it was totally out of my comfort zone. But it's one of these things where the more you do it, the more comfortable it gets. And I do like a bit of an adrenaline rush. So
baptism by fire for sure. Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah. So, but sorry, getting back to my unorthodox journey. So I did sort of that media communications nutrition for quite a while. When I had my first child, I actually left my full-time job and I ran my own business for well over 12 years. And it was kind of nice because I could, pick my own hours, pick my clients, the people I don't really like, I don't want to work with them. I kind of got to that point. Yeah. But then as I did more of this media communications, it then became into this world of the influencer. And I think that's really where our paths crossed, right?
Yes, yeah, I think so.
And I was like, influencer, like, what is this? Like before, I was one of the very few people doing what I did, being in the nutrition world. But then all of a sudden, there's like this whole crop of quote unquote younger people coming up. And like there was a whole different dynamic. And I thought, I didn't get into this to be an influencer, and I don't want to spend 20 hours of my day building my brand. Like, no, I don't think so. The other part of it was I got to the point where I was like, okay, I've been doing this thing for 20 years or so, and it was kind of getting old. Like, as much as I loved the media thing, I really did love it. I thought, okay, and it allowed me to express some creativity on pitching to producers and all that kind of stuff. I thought there's something missing here. And I think part of it is people were so fixated on food. But when we think about living a healthy life, it's more than just food, right? It's like moving more, stressing less, boosting your brain power, being creative, right? Yeah. Being creative is actually very good for healthy aging.
Where did the opportunity come up? Because
yeah. So then what happened is, okay, after I realized this is not the space I want to be in, I'm done with sort of that food and whatever communications, I looked around, I'm like, I need to pivot, but I need to pivot in a way that it makes sense. I still wanted to do something around health communications. And I got really lucky. I joined the amazing communications team at CIHI, which is the Canadian Institute for Health Information. I learned a ton, especially how things work in a large organization. That was completely new to me. The people were great. And it just really gave me time to, catch my breath and like really help me pivot in a good way. Right. But in the meantime, I was looking at what are the opportunities out there. So in 2018, I attended the Global Conference on Aging. It was in Toronto. And I went there and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. Like, these are my people. I feel like I finally found my people. And so I quickly signed up to be the Toronto ambassador for Aging 2.0, which is a global network of innovators. And then really just looked around to see what are the opportunities in this space. And I got really lucky because SE Health had this consulting contract position where it was to do quote unquote stakeholder engagement for their Courage Action for Better Aging initiative. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to put my hat in the ring. We'll see how it goes. Had a great conversation with my, current VP, and it just felt right. And when I joined, like I just loved it. And it's funny because for an introvert, I actually do enjoy talking to people, because it's really more about asking them questions and letting them talk and less about me. So that's how that was kind of my very bizarro journey to where I am. And then once, as part of SE Health, then the aging team took place. It's only been around for a year and a half or so. And my VP was like, do you want to join this team? I'm like, yes, I do. And so that's how all of that happened. So if you asked me 5 years ago, where are you going to be in 5 years? Or where do you see yourself? Like, you just can't ask those kind of questions. At least I don't think, because it's hard to plot these things out, right?
It is. You never know what's going to fall in your lap or what's going to pique your interest. So what is it that you actually do now with this new team that you're on?
Well, we do a lot of things. But we really look at, okay, in the broad aging space, so we're all about social impact. So we're not in the day-to-day sort of care delivery that SE Health
Right.
does and has been doing for 115 years. It's a fantastic organization. So we're in their future of aging social impact team. So we look at the broader ecosystem of what are the big challenges out there related to aging? What are the big opportunities? And because we're not for profit, pretty much everything that we do in partnership with others. It's also very hard for one single player to, tackle these big issues.
Yes.
So if we look at kind of where we play actually globally. We're one of the few Canadian groups who are part of the UN open-ended working group on aging. And that's all about the human rights of older adults and sort of that ageism piece speaks to that piece, which is if older adults had a convention that protected their human rights, then maybe, we wouldn't have things like ageism, right? Would kind of keep it and rein it in a bit. Then we look at things nationally, so across the country, and this is really where the Courage initiative comes in, which is to say, most people want to live at home as they get older, and especially after COVID. Like, I don't know who actually wants to go into an institution. Obviously, there's a role for people who need a lot of help, but you can make the argument you can actually get that type of long-term care at home. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Courage is all about, we need to respect what people want. So while the overwhelming number of people want to live at home, when you look at where government funding goes, it's to institutions. So it's kind of like, okay, there's a huge disconnect here. And people have been talking about this for over 30 years, right? Like, why hasn't the system changed? And a few years ago, our former CEO had a conversation with the CEO of Covenant Health in Alberta. And they said, I think that part of the reason is we're all working in silos. So you've got all these little voices saying to government, hey, can we do this? Can we change the system? But what we really need is one coordinated, cohesive voice. And that's really the Courage Coalition. And I've been privileged to work on this project for 2 years. It's a slow process because you got to bring on all these partners. And it's not just organizations. It's also like everyday people like you and me.
Yeah.
And people listening. We need to start a social movement to say, hey, someone's got to pay attention here because our population is growing older and we have certain needs. We want to live at home, but who's doing the yard work? Can I get some help with my groceries? Like these kind of day-to-day things that would actually help people live at home. There's just not a lot of support.
Yes. So in my case, my dad actually lives with me. He had a traumatic brain injury about 13 years ago. So he's he's very capable of looking after himself. He just doesn't have any short-term memory. So that causes its own set of challenges. But navigating the system when he was first going through his recovery and figuring out what was going to happen with him next was just a nightmare. And all I could think about is one day I'm going to be old. This is going to be me trying to figure this out. And it was kind of scary to see I don't even know the right words to say it, but it was disheartening, I guess is the best thing, because I could see so many ways that he could have a very productive life. But it wasn't going to happen if he was in an institution. He was too fit and too healthy and too capable for that to happen. But at the same time, with no short-term memory, he couldn't be on his own without someone kind of just keeping an eye on things, making sure he remembered to turn the stove off and things like that. And there didn't seem to be a space in the middle. And I remember thinking, wow, one day this will be me. And what if there's nobody to advocate for me? Because he at least had his kids and I don't have kids. So that was a big, big, scary thing for me. And there just didn't seem to be a lot of resources. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again, because he was 70 at the time that he had this brain injury, was that, well, he's old. It's like, but he was in university when this happened. Like he was active. He was doing all these things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a 70-year-old man, but he was out there doing them and they didn't seem, anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a thing here because this is something that hits very close to home, but yeah, I just felt like there has to be a better way, but I had no idea where to go or how to make that happen. So just hearing that there's people out there who are actively working to bring about some change is very heartening instead of disheartening. So
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I have to say your dad is lucky to have you. When we started on this courage journey, we did a fair bit of research to see, what are those things that are going to help people live at home? I don't like the term age in place. Like that's, I don't know. Literally, aging is living, right? Like we're
yes,
all living.
we're
We're all
aging right now.
aging since
That's
we're
right.
born, right? Like every minute, every second, we are aging. But all to say, and what you're talking about is, as a caregiver, care partner, having to navigate this and not having supports, like it's a bit of a nightmare. And so when we've done research on what's going to help people, you come across we need age-friendly communities, age-friendly neighborhoods. We need care to come to someone's home. The caregiver piece comes into play. But also with people having fewer children, or if they have children or relatives, like people are spread out across the country, right? So there's going to be a big shift from informal caregivers like yourself to more formal caregivers. And that's like a whole other conversation around,
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that? Like that really is that's a whole other episode. But to your point, one of the reasons that there's such a disconnect between what people want and where we spend money has to do with systemic ageism, because clearly people in power have decided that this is not a group of people who are super important, right? You've hit a certain age, you're just going to die anyway. So why would we spend money on you? We want to fit you and warehouse you in, certain building or whatever. That's where you're going to go. But again, what about people's dignity and the right to grow older on their own terms? And that's really where Courage is going. So we're really going to ramp up and invite everyone to be part of this movement for change, because it's time. And I think COVID really has been that tipping point. Now, jumping off sort of that systemic ageism piece, another big initiative that I do with the Future of Aging team is just combating ageism in general. And so ageism is age discrimination. It's how you feel towards people, how you act towards people. And it's basically being judged on your age. And I think women in particular experience that a lot more, right? Your looks, you're this, you're that, whatever. So yeah, ageism is a huge issue. People tolerate it, right? Like, oh, you're over the hill, you're whatever. Can't teach an old dog new tricks, or I'm having a senior moment, like all these things. They're just, and you get those birthday cards. Like once you hit, what is it, 40 or something, the birthday cards are the worst, right? Like really? Anyway, so
Yes.
combating ageism, that's like and I think that especially for women, because we feel it more, I feel like kind of now is the time that more and more people are not taking it, or there's at least a bit more awareness that, okay, we got to kind of tackle this head on, right? Like enough with the discrimination.
Absolutely. So that was kind of where I was going to go with this, is that, most of the people who listen to this podcast are women, and it skews a little bit older. So we all, we're I'm well over the 40 milestone. And a lot of the people who listen are kind of older millennials or Gen X. You and I are both Gen X. I think we're very close in age, if I remember correctly. And there's a lot of apprehension, I think, especially when you're a woman and you're aging, because so much, whether we like to talk about this or not, or say it, so much of how we're judged is our appearance. It's not right, but it is what it is. And there's just that feeling, I started growing out my gray hair when I turned 50, or actually just prior to that, because it was still the pandemic and nobody was getting their hair done. So I was like, might as well do it now. But I have other friends who are doing that, and it's very traumatic for them. Like it's this piece of their identity, and they're worried about the judgment that's going to come with it. But I also think that there's this group of Gen X. We're a generation that doesn't get talked about very much, sort of stuck between millennials and boomers. But I feel like we're always sort of talked about as like the, I read somewhere the other day, we were the last generation of feral children. But just this idea that we were very self-sufficient. We grew up very self-sufficient. And do you think there's a different attitude with this group and the millennials coming up behind where, yeah, you know what, I am not going to age like that. That's not going to be how it's going to work for me. Or do you think there's some of that happening, or do you see it?
Possibly. I mean, I don't have any hard data or
Right.
research to suggest that. I do feel like, yes, we're both Gen X, and I have to say, so I'm 51, and people are like, oh, you don't look it. I'm like, okay, well, that's fair. But someone said, actually, for them to say you don't look it is actually ageist. I'm like,
it is.
Really? Okay. I guess, because then they're looking at someone else, say, oh yeah, you definitely look 51, right? But it's funny, when I did turn 51 this summer, someone said, oh, well, it's your birthday, it must be another 29. And I thought, why? Like, no, like I'm okay telling you, here's my age, but that's only been recent. Like before, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm in my 40s or whatever. If you think I'm in my 30s, that's great. I would never correct anyone. But now I'm like, no, you need to own your age, because we need to normalize getting older. And I think that's part of it, right? It's like age is a disease. You know what I mean? Like, you're getting older, there's some crazy disease happening here. You know what I mean? Like, but in terms of the generational perspective, I don't know. I mean, you also can't say this whole generation thinks this way, right?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know. That's just my take on it. But I feel like we're starting to get more role models and celebrities who are rocking it, right? So I think there's that piece of it, because think about the Super Bowl halftime show a couple of years ago. It was J-Lo, who I think was 50 at the time, Shakira, who was late 40s, and they just blew people away, right? Like, that was amazing. So we're starting to see that kind of a thing where it's like, okay, people are achieving things, right? Like, and I think as more and more people start to speak out, it helps to change the narrative of what it means to age, right? And so people have also said, well, the word aging there's a stigma attached to it, which is fair. But then I think by using it more and more in a normalized way, you actually strip some of that stigma away.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I'm focusing on with the season of the podcast, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that we're working to show that it's okay to allow ourselves to show up as our true selves, and at any age. So this isn't just about whether you're 20 or 40 or 60 or 80 or whatever. But as we get older, so for me, it's been very interesting. Like, on the one hand, I have no problem with being the age that I am. It doesn't bother me. I love the comfort I feel with who I am. Like, I feel like I know myself now, which, in your 20 and your 30s, I think you're kind of getting to know yourself. You're figuring it out. You're not, but it becomes clearer and clearer as you get older. But there is also this fear that, like, is anybody going to listen to me? Am I becoming irrelevant? I saw a TikTok the other day where they talked about people in their 50s who were technophobes. And I was like, no, and yet we're carrying around this very valuable wealth of knowledge in our brains that we earned. We learned it. We experienced it. So there's this whole question, and it's a big question that I'm going to throw out there, but how do we get comfortable with embracing all that experience and not being afraid to stand up and share it, or to let it shine through our work, through our creativity, through our day-to-day life, without that nagging voice in the back of our head that's saying, is anybody going to listen to you, kind of thing?
Yeah, I guess, this is the part where, it's very easy to say own your age, but there's so many other factors, right? Like, people are saying stuff to you, people are ignoring you. I know in some of the conversations that I've had with older adults as part of my work, I heard time and again from older women. So these would be women in their 70s and beyond, I just feel invisible, is what they said. And I thought, wow, like I've not experienced that. But for them, it's like, oh yeah, I was trying to do this, trying to do that. And people just were like, okay, just not really listening, right?
Mhm.
So part of the being comfortable is also looking at yourself inwardly and saying, am I biased against myself? Like, am I putting limits on myself? Like, oh, I'm too old to do this, or I can't dress a certain way because of my age, right? So being ageist against other people is one thing, but you can also be ageist against yourself now and also your future self. So I think the first step really is self-reflection. Are you giving off vibes, or are you saying certain things where it's like, I can't do this, I'm over the hill? Like, what's your vibe, right? Like, so it has to start internally, but then it's also seeing and recognizing externally and calling it out. And I think as more and more people start calling it out, it's just going to create that awareness. But I mean, I don't know about you, but certainly when I hit 40, I really felt like it was quite liberating. I would just say stuff. I mean, obviously not in a rude way, but I would just say it like it is, right? Like I really didn't care at the time, or I still don't. I'm like, it is what it is. And it's okay to disagree on something respectfully, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't have the answers apart from you also need to seek like-minded people. So
Mm.
there's a group on Instagram called the 50 Forward Club, and Lisa Murphy headed this up, and it's great. And she showcases all these amazing quotes and achievements of women who are 50 and above who are doing amazing things. So there's that sort of inspirational part of it too, of being with a community of people who are, you know, like-minded. So that could be a place. But I have to say, when we look at ageism and what are those strategies to combat ageism? One of the ones which is really quite powerful is what they call, quote unquote, intergenerational initiatives, meaning you want to hang out and do things with people of different generations. And by doing that, you're actually going to help smash these ageist stereotypes, right? So, here's an example. I have recently taken up pickleball, and I was saying this to someone, and they were like, pickleball? Who are you playing with? Like 80-year-olds? I'm like, no, but even if I was, why is that a problem? Right? Like,
Yes.
okay, I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry, I don't know where I was going with that, but it's one of these things where you want to play with or hang out with people, cooking club or whatever,
Yeah.
book club, with different people. And I definitely see it with my own children. Like, as much as when they hang out with their grandparents or when they're hearing stories, it gives them that appreciation for, wow, they actually, like you said, they have all this wisdom, they have all this experience. And just, a few months ago, for my dad, he was talking about the very first time when he was a child, he encountered ice. And, he lived in India at the time. And he's like, the first time I had like ice, and the kids were just like, wow, this is really cool. Like, you didn't have ice in your fridge. Like, I didn't have a fridge at the time, but you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like, it just makes them appreciate A, what they have, but B, that people have different experiences and you can learn so much from
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah. Definitely. If I could have dinner with anyone on the planet, it would be all four of my grandparents who they're not with us anymore, but I just feel like I squandered so much time with them, not asking them all the questions I have now about their lived experience. And yeah, didn't appreciate it as much when I was younger as I do now, but now I wish I could hear all those stories. So yes, I think intergenerational helps. I think you want to do it from both ends, right? You want to talk to people who are older than you, but you also want to be around people who are younger than you. And I don't know, there's so much to be learned from both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree. And
yeah.
when we talk about wisdom, it's not just wisdom of the older people, but younger people as well, a certain kind of wisdom, right? and sometimes my kids will say things, I'm like, wow, that's really insightful. Like, I don't think I would have thought of that at your age. So yeah, it goes both ways. Absolutely. Right. And so when we look at some of the more sort of formal programs to help, there's these, like a lot of library programs. I hate this term, but it's like cyber seniors programs. So you help older adults learn technology. And then, it's kind of that two-way mentorship in a way, right? So yeah, there's those formal programs, but even just in your neighborhood, having informal conversations with neighbors or helping them out or whatever. But you're right, it's all ages. It's not just for the older or whatever. It really is for everyone.
It does. It makes for a much more vibrant life when you have all different kinds of people in it.
And the other thing, so I host the Future Age podcast it's part of my job. And last season, I had the pleasure of interviewing Carl Honore. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a TED Talk speaker, broadcaster. He's Canadian, but he lives in the UK. And one of his books is called Bolder, kind of like, was it Bolder? But it's like rethinking aging or a radical rethink on aging, something like that. Anyway, so as part of our conversation, we talked about entrepreneurship. And we said, when people think entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur, they're thinking about a 20-year-old kid in their garage or the basement. Yeah. But when you look at research, actually, the most successful entrepreneurs are above the age of 40. Then we talked about, okay, so let's think about, say, Julia Child. She published her first cookbook when she was 50. Vera Wang, fashion industry, she was above the age of 40. And if you're into comics and Marvel and all of that, Stan Lee published his first comic at the age of 40. And, the list goes on. And so it's not just also when they started, but continue to work, right? So I love David Attenborough. He's 92, 93, and he's just, there's no barriers for him. There's no boundary. Yeah. So it's like, if you think you can do something, I mean, obviously there can be physical limitations, but there are ways to get there. And this 65 being this magical number to, I don't know what, it's not age. It's really a state of mind.
Yes, absolutely. There is a fantastic book. I don't know if you've read it, but I think you'd probably really enjoy it if you haven't. I think it's called A Glorious Freedom by Lisa Congdon. And she's an artist based on the West Coast here. She's in Oregon, I believe now. And she didn't really become an artist till she turned 40. And she wrote this book. Basically, she gathered stories of women through the centuries, mostly current, but women from the past as well, who didn't start the thing that they're famous for or well known for until they were 40. And what was really fascinating about this book was that most of these women lived well into their 90s and were active doing the thing they were known for up until they couldn't do it anymore. And I just thought like the connection is just, it's right there in front of me on the pages of this book, right? Is when you find the thing that lights up your soul and you are excited about doing it every day, you want to stick around because you want to keep doing it. It was such an obvious connection between a long life and doing things that you're passionate about. And one of the things you mentioned entrepreneurs and how most of the well-known ones or the successful ones are in their 40s. And it's kind of this whole thing. We talked about it briefly before we came on to record, was a lot of women, when they get to their 40s and then their 50s and they've had a career, they still have a career, but maybe it's not really doing it for them anymore, or it was just the job that they had to pay the bills. Their kids are leaving home, and now they're at this stage where they want to try something new, or they need to fill the time, but there's a block there of like, am I too old? Is it too late? I'm 40, like as if 40 is the end point, and how I don't know, what can we do or say to kind of get ourselves over that roadblock and realize that you could have another 40, 50 or more years ahead of you, more years ahead of you than you have behind you. And so why is it so hard for us to start something new? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is confidence, right? So if you haven't done paid work and you were working, being the CEO of your house and managing children, whatever, you definitely take a confidence hit. And I see that in my neighborhood, for sure. Like I know many amazing women who've taken a career pause, but not to say that they were sitting doing nothing, right? And it is that, right? So it's, for some of them, they found like there's certain coaching groups or they worked with a coach. For others, it's just finding the right people and having those connections. But yeah, to your point, I mean, part of the confidence hit is society telling you that, wow, you've hit 40 and you're a woman. Wow. Really, what more is there, right? Look at the ads. Like some of these ads of these luxury brands, they have 16-year-olds or 18-year-olds. I'm like, they can't afford the stuff that they're modeling. Like, let's get real here, right? So there are some brands that are starting to get smart about, actually showing older people, because let's face it, they have the money, right? Like they have the money to spend, where the 18-year-old wearing this luxury whatever watch doesn't. So brands are starting to get smarter. But sorry, going back to your point about women in the workforce and whatever, you're absolutely right. Like if you find kind of that purpose or sort of passion, then yeah, like this is something that you're going to run and go for it. But it's allowing yourself to be open to that and not, again, thinking I've hit 40 or 45, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like I'm done, right? So I'll give you an example. There's a good friend of mine. She's in the neighborhood and she's always wanted to write and illustrate a book. And she finally did. So she's been thinking about this for 20 years. She finally did. Her girls are at university and published her book at the age of 55. And is loving it and is doing a book tour. And I'm just so happy for her. And now she's like, oh, I can't wait to do my next book. I'm like, this is great, right? Like you've found your fire, right? Like, so I would say, and obviously, some people have that privilege of looking around to see, oh, what is my passion, and go run with it. Other people, obviously, right? You've got to earn and be self-sustaining. But that actually brings up a really interesting point, which is because women face ageism a lot more than men, this actually does have a huge impact on their financial well-being. And we know that women, like, we're living longer, right? So I happen to look up our longevity stats. So someone right now who is 65, the life expectancy is they would live to about 87. So this is for women, 87. So people say, our age, we could live well into our 90s. So if you working, like earning an income at 65, you better have a lot of savings to make it to 90s. A lot of money. I'm going to tell you, that's not going to be me. So I feel like we need to think through some of this. And that's part of flipping the system, is stop telling people or giving them cues that 65 and you're done. It's like, done doing what? Like what's happening for the next 30 years, to your point. And there are groups cropping up that are talking about the next act. Like, what is it now? And for some people, it's like, okay, I did work that I didn't hugely love, but it paid the bills. But now it's the third act, which is, what is that purpose? What is now going to give me meaning? And, that, and also finding those social connections, because that's one of the other things, the biggest predictor of your longevity and how healthy you're going to be as you grow older are those social connections, which is shocking to me coming from a nutrition background. I'm like, what? It's not about eating 5 vegetables a day. It is partly, right? You got to also eat better. But yeah, if you're socially isolated, it really does impact your health tremendously. So, that Blue Zones docuseries, I thought that was really interesting, where they travel around the world and look at hotspots where there's, the most centenarians, so they're 100 and
Oh,
above.
yes, I think, and
Yeah,
it
so
says,
they traveled around, and the upshot of it was, these are remote communities where there's very little technology. So it's not
mhm,
really the real world, right?
yeah.
But having said that, they have managed to kind of engineer that in Loma Linda, California. But what they have found is like kind of these four key drivers of longevity. So eating better, more plant-based, moving naturally. So they're like, look, none of these Okinawans in Japan are going to the gym every day, right? They're not. But what they are doing is walking, right? In the community, they're going to visit people, or this part of whatever it is they're continuing to do as they get older. No one's retired. Everyone has a role to play in their community.
Yeah.
And that being part of a community, that sense of belonging, that's a huge, huge driver of healthy aging. So, and it's fascinating because you can see these trends in many of these blue zones. So it's not like you need to go move to these places, but it's just people are slowing down, right? Like it's not all zipping around and driving your kids to 10 different activities a week. Like that's not their culture, right? So
No.
I think we also have to keep some of that in mind as well. It's like, what is your rich life? And I don't mean financially rich.
Yeah. So maybe instead of retiring, it is, like you said, your next act or finding your next purpose. I think that's what we all need. We need to feel like we have a purpose. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
but our purpose can change as we get older. Like it can be
Totally.
different things, right? So what's your
Yeah.
next purpose? So yes, that was a very interesting documentary. I did see it. And yeah, it's just fascinating. And that was very much the truth. The Japanese group, they've like you said, everyone in the community had a purpose. They had something that they did to keep that community thriving. And when you think about the amount of stress we put on ourselves, like that can't be good for healthy aging.
No, no, for sure not. And this term retirement, I think we need to retire retirement.
Retirement.
Like, I don't know what this means. I mean, younger, I'd be like, ooh, retirement 65. It sounds great. Can't wait. But now I'm just like, this makes no sense to me because
No.
you could live at least 20, 25 years beyond. And apart from the financial stuff, what would you actually do? Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're super wealthy and are playing golf and going on cruises, like what would you actually do? And this social participation, being part of the community, again, that is so important. And older people need to be allowed to play a role in community and not just sort of shut out to say, okay, run along, play your whatever games, bingo at the community center. Like that's not what it is,
Yeah.
right? So um you know and one of my podcast guests, there was actually the future of work was an episode, and I
Mm.
spoke to Lisa Taylor of the Challenge Factory, and this was fascinating because she said, where did this 65 age come from? And apparently it was in the 1930s depression era in the US. I think it was Franklin Roosevelt or whoever was like, okay, the average life expectancy then was 62. So they put in quote unquote retirement at 65. So in case you made it past 62, you had a bit of a, kind of a financial buffer there.
Right.
Well, it's, almost 100 years later, things have changed. So this 65 is so completely arbitrary. And to your point, like, yeah, we all need a purpose. We need to have some meaning in life. And as people get older, that's more about giving back to the community and that social impact and doing good. Like you look at, say, a Bill Gates, he's doing amazing work around the world. And, was this his thing 40 years ago? No, but it is now.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be a Bill Gates, obviously, to do good work. But That's a whole other conversation. But anyway, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
Yeah,
like, what is that thing? Like, what's that connection? And it's really also about finding like-minded people. They do exist. You just kind of have to find them
you
and
do.
be champions for one another, right?
Yes, exactly. And make the effort. Be the person who says hello. I think and just to your point about like life expectancy and things, I heard an interview, this was a couple of years ago, and I wish I could remember who it was with, but he was saying that they firmly believe that the first person to live to 125 has been born. So, like, that life expectancy is probably going to continue to increase. So, for people who are younger, 100 could be a very attainable age for a lot of young people out there. And I watched there's a documentary being made with Canadian women who served during World War II. And they were interviewing four of these women. Three of them were 100 or over, and the fourth one was 98 or 99. And they were just amazing women. They were so incredibly vibrant and just super thrilled to be talking about this work that they did. But yeah, I just thought, wow, if I am that together and excited about life when I am 100, like I really need to think about that's 50 years away for me, or 49 years away for me. And like, that's a long time. What do I want to fill that time with, and feel like it's worth it? So I think we have to kind of rethink this whole getting older process, because there's so much that we could be out there doing and having a good time and exploring new things. And maybe that's the way to look at it, is as you do get older, not only do you have all this extra wisdom that you've earned and learned and everything, but now you have this freedom to do things that maybe you couldn't have done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So let's fill those days up with all those fun things that
we I totally agree. It's interesting. You had sent me a question before this chat about what is success? What does that mean to you? And so I came across an illustration. It was a pie chart on LinkedIn. It said, here's what you think success looks like: your job, salary, right? Like, and I was like, yeah, actually, when I was younger, that's exactly what I thought. Actually, not that long ago, but anyway, but really what success is sure a job title and a salary, but it's also your physical health. It's your mental health. It's the ability to have free time. It's the ability, to connect with friends and family and have meaning and purpose and like all these other things. And I'm like, that is success. So even if you're in a job where you're like, this is not my passion, well, hopefully you've got time outside of that to then dive into your passion, whatever that is, right? Like being part of the community, giving back, or whatever it is. So, in my kind of ideal world, and you're talking about kids born today could live into their hundreds, maybe we're also slowly moving towards like a Star Trek kind of world. You know what I mean? Here's my science nerd stuff coming out. But you know what I mean? Like, we're kind of like, who's retired on Star Trek? I don't know anyone's retired, right? Like, they're all like, some of these species are 200, 300 years old. But you know what I'm saying? Like, we kind of need to evolve in a certain direction where everyone has a say and a role to play, no matter your age. Like, age really should be irrelevant, right? And something else that you mentioned, and it sparked a thought, which is learning and exploring. So lifelong learning, this is a thing, and we should be learning at every age. It's not just for kids who are in school or now you're at university. Like, that's very 20th century thinking. Now the learning is all your life. And so you have countries like Singapore, where part of their quote unquote aging plan is lifelong learning. And they make it really easy for people at any age to either go to university or learn in other ways. Like, people are constantly learning. And that's how are you going to keep your brain sharp and healthy? And yeah, so your point about exploring, you can explore in so many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned that my dad was in university when he had his brain injury. And I don't remember what he paid, but the province of BC makes it extremely accessible for anyone over the age of 65 to go to university. And I don't think it was free, but he certainly was not paying anywhere near full tuition. So, but I don't think people necessarily know those things, those opportunities are out there. So you do have to poke around and look for them. But yeah, so I guess to wrap this up, I will just mention, actually, we have a couple of episodes that if this topic really interests you, we did one with Sharon Marie White a few years ago. She's a country and Western singer-songwriter who went back for her next act and the music industry, the popular music industry, certainly has some ageism challenges, but she tackled them head on, and she's doing very well, which is so exciting to see. And we also did another episode with Liliana Tomasini, who started out as a computer software programmer in the 1970s, one of the first women to be in that field. And now she's a grandma, and she's writing children's books and doing really well with that as well. So two women who just created a second chapter for themselves, or a third chapter, or fourth. And there's so many opportunities to do that. But creativity, this is a podcast where we talk to creatives. We are about creativity. A lot of the people who are listening work in creative fields, and let's talk about that as part of a healthy aging journey, because I think creativity plays a huge role in how we grow older and what we choose to fill our time with.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's so many ways of being creative. As I mentioned, as a child, I always thought creative meant having the ability to draw, and it's not just that. It's
watercolor painting.
Yes, that's right. Oh gosh, that's very intimidating for me. But the whole nurturing your creativity, no matter in what way, is not only great for your mental health, but it's also great for your brain health, right? It just unlocks different parts of your brain. And again, creativity also allows you to connect with other people. So I think being creative and nurturing all of that is one of the keys to healthy aging, for sure.
So
similar to learning, create, go forth and create, right? I would say that if you want to live a healthy life. So whether that's gardening or painting or building, whatever it is, creativity, that's what we should be doing, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if a lot of us were already creative, that means you can try other types of creative endeavors. So if you're a painter, maybe you want to try your hand at writing poetry. If you're a writer, maybe you want to experiment with woodworking or something. Or, there's so many different avenues that you can go down that with. And I think it's all about curiosity at the end of the day, be curious about trying new things, because you never know what's going to click with you. And I always find that the people who are most interesting to talk to at any age are the people who are curious about how the world works and what's happening out there. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's all part of that lifelong learning and that newness, because that's what our brains need, is that newness. So you're right. If you're creative in one area, you're learning something else, then that, different different neurons get fired.
All those neural
paths. So releasing all those neural paths, the billions of nerve cells that we have. All of that. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And even if you don't feel that you're creative, someone like me, I think I'm very limited in many different ways, but it's also being okay with that, right? Just go out and explore, as you say.
Yeah.
So absolutely, at any age. And one of the things, if you recall in that docuseries, and just when I've listened to interviews of people who are in their 90s and hundreds, the other part of it is just not worrying so much. just be happy, which I know is very simplistic, but I think some of it is just letting things slide, just let it go. It's okay, just move on, right? Which I think is a difficult, but I was just amazed at how many people said, I just don't worry. I don't know what that's like, but I hope to get there.
I always think to myself, if there's one piece of advice I could go back and give 20-year-old Melissa, it would be exactly that. Just stop worrying. All those things you worried about in your 20s and your 30s, almost none of them happened. And stuff is going to happen. And you learn that as you get older. Like, life happens, bad things happen. But you know what? Almost always we get through them. Like, and there's no point in worrying about something that hasn't happened or that might happen, or that, I do think that's been one of the really positive things about getting older for me, is just, learning to just let it go. Easier said than done, I know. And it's different personalities, approach things differently, but oh my God, the amount of time I spent worrying in my 20s and 30s was ridiculous. Like, how productive could I have been if I had just stopped worrying about things that never ever happened?
Well, I read something recently which made me pause. It was like, okay, you can worry, but how is that productive? Like, what is the end result of that worrying? Like, if you actually took action, then you could see something. And I thought, that's actually a really good point. Yeah. What is the end result of worrying?
It's, for me, it was stress. Really, it was just,
right?
I was stressed out all the time because I was worried. Another thing that's kind of gave me a moment to think last week was, somebody sent me a meme, and I think I shared it on my Instagram account. I can't remember, about how, to our dogs, we're the 500-year-old elves in their story. And I just thought that's such an interesting way to look at it, because to an animal that lives 10 to 15 years, comparing themselves to somebody who lives to be 80 or 90, we're these wise elves who have seen so much. And it was a different way to think about it, because it's a different perspective, right? But,
no, for sure. For sure. I guess I would say, if I had to, here's sort of like the sign off, which is, number one, own your age, right? Like, don't be afraid of saying, I'm Zannat and I'm blank years old. Like, it is somewhat liberating. And also, you're never too old to try new things. You're never too old.
Yeah, absolutely. Two very good key points there. Zanna, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. It's been a long time since we've chatted, and it was really nice to have a conversation today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, it was good.
And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us this week. And we'll leave links to all the things that we talked about in today's show notes so that you can check them out. We talked a little about a few books and some documentaries and a few other things. So we'll leave links to all of that, as well as the episodes I mentioned. We'll leave a link to Zannat's podcast as well, so you can have a listen to that. And that is it for me this week. I'll be back again in 2 more weeks with another brand new episode, and we'll talk to you all then. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com, or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.